The marble atrium of the United States Capitol echoed like a cathedral of politics, its high dome casting back every murmur, every hurried footstep, every whispered speculation of reporters, who clustered like hawks waiting for a signal. The polished floors gleamed under the light of the chandeliers, reflecting flashes from cameras that seemed to multiply the tension in the air. For weeks, Washington had been murmuring about instability in West Africa, about whether new leaders in the Sahel were bending toward authoritarianism or reshaping democracy on their own terms. But today, Congressman Adam Schiff had chosen to make it official. He approached the podium with the kind of deliberate composure that years in the public I had carved into his bones. Schiff's suit was immaculate, his tie a shade of blue that television producers loved, and his expression that careful balance between concern and confidence. He adjusted his glasses as though preparing a legal argument rather than a political statement. Cameras clicked in staccato bursts. Pens hovered. A dozen networks cut in live. And then he spoke. "Let me be clear," Schiff began, his voice resonating through the chamber in that practiced rhythm that had made him both admired and despised in Washington. "The United States protects democracy around the world, and we will continue to do so even when certain leaders act as if it doesn't apply to them." He didn't name anyone. He didn't need to. The room rippled with the recognition of who the words were aimed at. Schiff's words were not only meant for domestic consumption. They were meant for satellites, cables, and screens far beyond Washington, and thousands of miles away, in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Those words landed with the weight of centuries. In a modest briefing room at the presidential compound, Ibrahim Traoré sat at a wooden table worn smooth by years of use. The air smelled faintly of dust and fresh paint. The compound had undergone renovations after his government rose to power, but traces of its older colonial architecture lingered. Traoré, dressed not in a tailored suit but in a simple, military-style uniform without insignia, leaned over papers that mapped new infrastructure projects, roads to connect villages, power lines to reach forgotten towns, clinics to be staffed by young doctors trained locally instead of abroad. It was work that felt urgent, tangible, and unpretentious. A staff member entered quietly, bowing his head with the respect owed to a leader but without the stiffness of fear. He handed Traoré a tablet. On the screen, a freshly uploaded clip, Adam Schiff at the podium. Traoré watched the video once, his face unreadable. Then again, slower this time, listening to each inflection. He set the device down gently, as if the words themselves were fragile porcelain. "He says they protect democracy," Traoré murmured, leaning forward, voice steady as stone. "Then he should stop undermining ours." The staffer said nothing. He didn't need to. Within minutes, that single line spread through encrypted apps, Twitter feeds, and WhatsApp groups. It leapt from phones to radios, from cafes in Ouagadougou to classrooms in Bamako, from journalists in Accra to activists in Lagos. Like sparks on dry grass, the phrase ignited, "Stop undermining our democracy." By nightfall, hashtags carried the message across Africa in French, English, and dozens of local tongues. The words were not merely a rebuttal. They were a reminder, a reclamation, a challenge. Back in Washington, Schiff smirked when a reporter thrust a microphone toward him in the Capitol hallway, asking for a response to Traoré's pointed remark. He spoke during a live interview later that evening, seated in a polished studio, where the backdrop was an animated American flag and the host nodded, like a student before a professor. "We are not undermining anything," Schiff insisted, his tone dismissive yet firm. "We are simply protecting democratic norms. Some leaders should learn the difference." The implication was sharp, almost paternal. Democracy, in Schiff's framing, was a discipline to be taught, corrected, and supervised. Traoré heard that interview too, later that evening, standing before the weathered stone facade of the old colonial governor's building, now repurposed as a public library. He addressed a crowd gathered in the square. They weren't shouting slogans or waving flags. They were simply there, listening, waiting. "Democracy is not a gift you hand to others," Traoré said, his voice carrying easily through the humid night. "It is a right earned and defended by the people who live it. We did not fight to replace one master with another. So if anyone truly wishes to protect democracy, they can start by stepping out of its way. The crowd didn't roar. They nodded, slowly, deliberately, nods that carried the weight of ancestors, of battles fought against colonial rulers, of sacrifices remembered in every family line. A new fight had already begun, not of bullets, but of words, of meaning, of legitimacy. In Washington, Schiff doubled down. The next morning, on one of America's most watched political talk shows, he sat in the guest chair, polished and confident. The host leaned forward eagerly, almost reverently, as Schiff spoke. "You can't claim sovereignty while ignoring democratic standards," Schiff declared. "The international order exists for a reason, to keep unstable regimes in check." The host nodded earnestly, as if Schiff had offered not a threat but a lesson in civics. Across the ocean, however, the words were heard differently. In Ouagadougou, Traoré was meeting with village leaders, planning a new community-funded health clinic. The courtyard where they gathered was simple, bricks stacked for construction, the sound of children playing in the distance. An elder, his hands calloused from years of farming, glanced at his phone. He read Schiff's words aloud, then looked calmly at the president. "How can a man who has never stepped on our soil," the elder asked, "decide whether our democracy is real?" Traoré didn't answer immediately. He studied the unfinished walls around them, the foundation laid not by foreign contractors but by local hands, men and women who carried bricks after long days in the fields. Finally, he spoke, quietly but firmly. "He can't. And that is exactly why he is trying." That evening, Traoré issued a short public statement. A democracy is not defined in a foreign capital. It is defined in every village where the people still decide their own future. The words traveled faster than any diplomatic cable. In Lagos, university students chalked it on classroom blackboards. In Accra, taxi drivers taped printouts inside their windshields. In Bamako, activists projected it in giant letters across the wall of the French embassy. The continent was echoing with a new refrain. Schiff, in yet another interview, responded with measured disapproval. "Regional pride is understandable," he said, "but without guidance, pride can become a threat, both to its people and to the democratic world." Traoré read the transcript in silence, then looked at his advisers. His face betrayed no anger, only a kind of sober recognition. "They don't fear our failure," he said at last. "They fear our success." And so the stage was set. The air thickened with pressure. Reports from US-aligned think tanks appeared almost overnight, warning that Burkina Faso was sliding toward authoritarianism. Aid projects were quietly suspended. Headlines in Western papers framed Traoré's government as hostile to the rules-based democratic order. In Washington, Schiff took the podium during a congressional hearing, his voice sharp with finality. "If Mr. Traoré continues down this path, rejecting principles of the international democratic system, then we must consider every option to prevent broader destabilization." The word option was not lost on anyone. It lingered like smoke. For those listening in Ouagadougou, it was not a vague policy term but a warning of the old playbook: sanctions, interventions, coups disguised as corrections. Back in the capital, citizens gathered in front of radios and phones, listening as Traoré appeared at the newly built village school. The sign above the doorway, hand-painted by children, read, "Our future is not a threat." Standing beneath it, Traoré addressed the crowd. "They say they protect democracy," he said, his hand resting on the wooden railing. "But they fear democracy when it no longer answers to them. What they call destabilization is simply the people deciding for themselves." From the back of the crowd, a young man raised his fist. "Then let them fear us," he shouted. Traoré lifted his hand gently, shaking his head. "No, not fear. Let them recognize us. Because that is what they fear most, that we no longer need their permission to exist, and we no longer accept their definition of what democracy should be." The crowd murmured agreement, their silence more powerful than any chant. And that night, across West Africa, people lit candles in their windows. They posted a simple sentence across social media: "Recognize our democracy. Stop undermining it." In Washington, Schiff watched the images flicker across the evening news. He leaned forward in his chair. eyes narrowing at the sight of thousands of candles glowing across Ouagadougou. They don't know what they're inviting, he muttered under his breath. But in Ouagadougou, they knew exactly what they were inviting. A democracy unchained from definitions. Written elsewhere, the silence in the corridor of the capital was deceptive, like the calm that comes before a violent storm. Outside, journalists clustered like vultures around every possible entry point, waiting for a glimpse of Traoré or Schiff. Inside, behind thick oak doors, history was beginning to unfold in a way no one had anticipated. Adam Schiff sat at the head of a long mahogany table, papers spread before him like weapons. His expression was sharp, calculated, the look of a man who had spent years shaping words into daggers. Around him sat a mix of senators, advisors, and intelligence figures, faces that carried the weight of the establishment. They spoke in low tones, debating strategies, contingency plans, and the optics of what had already erupted into the public domain. At the other end of the building, Traoré walked calmly with a delegation of African leaders who had flown in overnight. His steps were firm, his gaze unwavering. This was not the gilded comfort of Davos or the sterile hallways of Silicon Valley. This was the heart of the American empire, and he knew the stakes were higher than ever. The meeting that was about to occur was not on any public schedule. It was unofficial, off the record. But everyone present knew that its consequences could ripple across the globe. A clash of worlds. When Traoré entered the chamber, the room fell into an uneasy quiet. Schiff looked up, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. The African leader walked with a confidence that seemed almost defiant in a place like this. He wore no tie, no carefully tailored suit meant to impress Washington. Instead, he wore his traditional attire, flowing fabric with sharp patterns, a symbol of identity that could not be stripped away by Western decorum. "Mr. Traoré," Schiff said at last, his voice measured. "Welcome to Washington. I assume you understand the gravity of why you're here." Traoré's lips curled into a faint smile. "I do. I also understand that gravity does not pull only in one direction." A murmur spread across the room. Schiff leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "You've accused this government of meddling in Africa's destiny, of manipulating economies, even of orchestrating chaos. That is a serious charge to bring into the halls of power." Traoré's eyes flashed. "And yet it is a charge built on truth. Your fingerprints are in the coups, in the sanctions, in the whispered deals with oligarchs. You claim to defend democracy, but what you defend is your dominion." The words hit the chamber like a strike of thunder. Schiff's composure barely wavered, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation. Media pressure. Outside, the story was spiraling out of control. Networks broadcast split screens, one showing live protests outside the capital, the other replaying Traoré's fiery statements from earlier speeches in Africa. Commentators clashed on air. Traoré is exposing uncomfortable truths that Washington would rather keep buried. His grandstanding, playing to an international audience. This could destabilize U.S.Africa relations for years. For Schiff, the optics were becoming as dangerous as the dialogue itself. He knew every word exchanged behind closed doors might leak. And if it did, it could frame him as either the defender of American order or the face of hypocrisy. The turning point. Back inside, the confrontation grew sharper. Schiff tried to corner Traoré with legal language, citing treaties and diplomatic norms. But Traoré answered with history, with memory, with names of villages erased by drone strikes, of currencies strangled by debt systems that had been engineered in Washington. At one point, Schiff slammed his palm on the table. "Do you expect the world to simply abandon the structures that have kept it stable for decades?" Traoré rose to his feet, his voice booming across the chamber. "Stable for whom? For the bankers who feed on our resources? For the contractors who profit from war? Stability built on the suffering of millions is not stability, it is bondage." The force of his words left the room in stunned silence. Even Schiff, a man used to controlling narratives, seemed momentarily off balance. A private exchange. Later, when the larger group dispersed, Schiff and Traoré found themselves in a quieter corner of the capital, away from cameras and aides. Schiff's tone softened, though his words remained sharp. "You're clever," Schiff said. "You know how to play the media. But understand this. Revolutions that rise too quickly often burn out even faster. You might ignite a fire, but fires consume indiscriminately. Traoré stepped closer, lowering his voice. And you, Congressman, should understand this. Empires fall not because of the fire outside, but because of the rot within. You fear me because I hold up a mirror, and the reflection terrifies you. For a moment, the two men stood face to face, their gazes locked like swords. Escalation. By nightfall, Washington was boiling. Demonstrators filled the streets, some carrying signs praising Traoré, others demanding he be expelled. Helicopters circled above. News anchors spoke of an unprecedented clash on US soil. Inside think tanks and intelligence offices, debates raged. Should Traoré be contained, discredited, silenced? Or was it too late? That every attempt to suppress him would only fuel his legend further? Schiff retreated to his office, staring at the glowing skyline. He knew the confrontation had slipped beyond his control. Traoré was not just a man anymore. He was a movement, and movements were harder to defeat than individuals. Closing of the chapter. As midnight approached, Traoré stood on the steps of the Capitol, addressing a crowd that had gathered despite police barricades. His words cut through the cold air. They tell you freedom is fragile, that you must accept chains for the sake of order. But I say to you, no empire, however mighty, can withstand the truth once it is spoken. Tonight, Washington hears not my voice alone, but the voice of every silenced soul across the world. The crowd erupted, their chants echoing into the dark sky. Schiff, watching from a window high above, clenched his fists. He had faced opponents before, but never one who seemed to channel the heartbeat of an entire continent. The storm over Washington had only just begun. The hall felt like it was breathing. Every sound reverberated with a strange rhythm, the click of cameras, the murmurs from corners, the slow exhale of men who had spoken too much truth and could not take it back. Traoré stood at the center, his silhouette sharpened by the overhead lights. Across from him, Trump's face had lost the familiar television bravado. It was harder, more guarded, as if the man finally realized this confrontation was not a show but a reckoning. The tension of the previous exchanges still lingered in the air, but now it had settled into something colder, more defined. The crowd was restless. Journalists exchanged hurried whispers, their pens scratching like insects, while the security staff shifted uncomfortably, torn between protocol and instinct. The world outside did not know yet that history was being rewritten inside. These four walls, but it would. Traoré's voice cut through the silence like a blade. You built towers, Donald. Towers of glass, of concrete, of debt. But towers fall. And when they fall, they bury those beneath them, not those at the top. My people were buried under your towers long before you built them. You think you represent power, but all you represent is the illusion of choice, the ballot box that never asks the right question, the stage-managed democracy that feeds on despair. Trump leaned forward, hands gripping the table. His knuckles turned white. You talk like you've seen the world from the top, but you haven't. I know what it's like to fight, to win, to beat everyone who said, I couldn't. You think you're the only one who knows struggle? I built my empire when everyone wanted me gone. You. Traoré raised his hand. Stop. Your struggle was for vanity. Mine is for survival. You wanted your name on buildings. We wanted water that was not poisoned. You wanted headlines. We wanted medicine. You wanted applause. We wanted to bury our dead with dignity. Do not confuse the two. The room fell silent again. Even Trump did not speak immediately. He swallowed hard, his practiced smirk faltering. For the first time, the audience saw him not as the towering spectacle but as a man cornered. Behind them, screens flickered with live footage from outside. Protesters had gathered. They held signs not just against Trump, but against everything the confrontation symbolized: inequality, corruption, the machinery of power that had fed on the weak for generations. The chants began to echo faintly through the reinforced glass. Listen to them, Traoré said, turning toward the noise. They are not here for me. They are not even here for you. They are here for themselves, because for once someone forced the mask to slip. You have ruled by spectacle, but spectacle is crumbling. Even the stage lights cannot hide the cracks anymore. Trump straightened, regaining fragments of his showman's confidence. They'll chant today and forget tomorrow. The world doesn't change because of noise. It changes because of deals, because of money, because of strength. You think speeches change anything? You'll find out the hard way they don't. Traoré smiled faintly, not with joy but with certainty. You are wrong. Speeches do not change the world. But truth does. And today, truth has been spoken where it was not meant to be heard. At that moment, one of the journalists stood up. He was young, his tie crooked, his notepad trembling in his hands. Sir, he said, voice unsteady, are you saying this? This confrontation. It's the beginning of something larger. Traoré turned to him slowly, his eyes steady, his tone solemn. It is not the beginning. It is the continuation. The beginning was when the first child starved while others threw away food. The beginning was when the first well dried, while bankers sold rivers to corporations. This is not the beginning. This is the refusal to keep silent. The words struck the crowd like a hammer. Pens stopped. Cameras froze. Even Trump's team shifted uneasily, sensing the ground moving beneath them. Trump slammed his hand on the desk, desperate to seize control. You think you've won something here? You've just talked. Talk is cheap. The real world runs on contracts, on armies, on institutions that have been around long before you, and will be here long after. Traoré stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper, though the microphones caught every syllable. No empire lasts forever. Not Rome. Not the Ottomans. Not even the empire you think you built in gold letters. Empires fall not because of enemies at the gates, but because of rot within. And your empire, Donald, is rotting. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst. It pressed down on the shoulders of everyone in the room. For a long moment, Trump said nothing. His lips parted, but no words came. His face was pale under the lights. Then the chants outside grew louder. They were no longer faint. They were thunder. Security moved nervously toward the exits, their earpieces buzzing with instructions. But the crowd inside did not disperse. They were transfixed. Traoré turned, not to Trump but to them. You came here for a show, but you will leave with a choice. The choice to remain spectators in your own downfall, or to stand as participants in your own survival. Do not wait for men like him to save you. Do not wait for systems designed to bury you to suddenly lift you. Rise, because no one else will rise for you. The words seemed to ignite the air itself. Journalists forgot their role as neutral scribes. Some nodded. Some clapped, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. The dam had cracked. Trump tried one final line, his voice sharp, almost pleading. They'll turn on you. They always do. The same people you praise will abandon you when it's convenient. That's the way the world works. Traoré faced him one last time. Perhaps. But I would rather be abandoned for speaking truth than applauded for selling lies. With that, he stepped back from the table. The lights still glared, the cameras still rolled. But the stage no longer belonged to Trump. It belonged to the words, to the crowd, to the unseen millions who would watch and decide for themselves. Trump sat down heavily, as if the weight of his own defenses had finally collapsed. He stared ahead, not at Traoré, not at the crowd, but at something beyond. Something he could not control. For a man who built his life on being untouchable, the moment was unbearable. Outside, the chants reached their crescendo. Inside, silence followed Traoré's final words, but it was not empty. It was charged, alive, dangerous. History had shifted by a fraction, but enough that nothing would ever align the same way again. And as Traoré walked out, the cameras following his every step, the world realized that the confrontation had not ended in that room. It had only just begun.